Recently, Thuletide and Joel Davis have gotten into a bit of a spat on Telegram over Davis's video on cultural Marxism. The basic gestalt of the video, or at least the controversial part, is that cultural Marxism isn't real Marxism, that the term should be retired because it's actually just a safe version of Marxism that cannot cause class warfare. Basically, Joel Davis is saying that it's just a kind of racial warfare that it distracts from class, and also further that it has become a capitalist strategy to divide and conquer rather than a real form of Marxism. This prompted Thuletide to give a response, countering this argument. I'll start this out by saying that I think Thuletide's conception of cultural Marxism is much more coherent and well-informed than Davis's, so I tend toward his arguments. Although there are a few points in which he's been a little bit dishonest, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Davis's arguments against liberal conservatism in this video were also very good, but I think he fails on the Marxism question. What are his real beliefs? I don't know, but it seems kind of like he's trying to rescue Marxism away from socialism, rather than to do the opposite, as Mustache Man did. As both a Thuletide and Joel Davis enjoyer, I'll go ahead and respond to Joel Davis here and point out where he has gone wrong. So, first of all, in his video, Davis claims that cultural Marxism focuses on race and that Marx would have seen this as a distraction. He doesn't realize that cultural Marxists make this very same argument. The reason they focus on power disparities between races is because they believe that the whole system of white privilege is designed to give race, which they deconstruct and turn into a social construction, a socially necessary reason to exist. By fueling racial conflict, they aim to dismantle whiteness or any other kind of raceness in general. They want to bring down the color line, as W.E.B. Du Bois put it, that prevents blacks and whites from becoming mutually class-conscious and teaming up against the bourgeoisie. White privilege prevents the white proletariat from becoming class-conscious because they belong to the white race and feel privileged therefore. So part of the process for cultivating class consciousness among white people is to abolish whiteness. This also goes for blackness at some point down the line. I'm not saying that the cultural Marxists act consistently with their worldview, but this is really what cultural Marxism boils down to. It's a cultural approach to the realization of class consciousness on a societal scale. So already, 2 minutes into the video, he's strawmanning cultural Marxism, trying to claim that its focus isn't on class warfare or that its end isn't the instatement of socialism. If it's properly understood, though, it's obvious that his view is wrong. The whole video is basically contingent upon this error. He diagnoses the conservative response to cultural Marxism as wrong because he thinks socialism is not the end goal of cultural Marxism. A quick survey of any academic text on critical racial theory, such as Abolishing White Democracy by Joel Olson, reveals actually that the conservatives are more or less correct in that it's kind of a socialist fifth column. But sure, I will grant Davis that there is another angle to this that conservatives are missing out on, which their liberal ideology blinds them to. Capitalists are using critical racial theory to buttress their own power via bio-Leninism and also by leg sweeping out the white middle class, aka the social master class, as de Juvenal might have put it, which is the only force preventing the government from becoming a totalized statocracy. Other than that, I will say that his points about the weakness of liberalism to combat this capitalist-communist alliance are correct. Now, I'll move on to Davis's Telegram response to Thuletide. Davis reduces Marxism to an economic theory, but it does have some cultural elements, as Thuletide stated in his response. You would have to deliberately ignore Marx calling for the abolition of the family, the nation, and religion to claim that Marxism had no social elements. My argument in the video was therefore that according to Marxist theory, only class warfare can produce socialism. Race warfare can't produce socialism because race isn't an economic category, and so race warfare can only change race relations, not economic relations. Therefore, even though they take inspiration from Marxist theory, the so-called cultural Marxists fundamentally violate the logic of Marxism. There's no clear reason to me why pushing mass immigration, affirmative action, feminism, gay rights, etc. will necessarily cause socialism. It's entirely possible for capitalism to remain in place, but with non-whites, women, and gays all running it. This is a fair assessment in part, but I also think it's kind of autistic, and it kind of misses the point to claim that race has no relationship to class in Marxist theory. Yeah, sure, it's not orthodox Marxism, but Marx still believed that social norms have some relationship to class, hence why he wanted to abolish religion, for example. We could obviously extend this all the way to race, because race could impede class consciousness through a feeling of belonging to a privileged collectivity. That's what the cultural Marxists wanted to point out in systemic racism theory. Post-Marxists intensified the original logic that social norms are related to class and can be obstacles for class consciousness. They argue at length that the white bourgeoisie uses race in order to maintain class norms, using race to divide the proletariat and to offer the proles some privilege in order to keep them complacent. This is the argument that cultural Marxists make, and they clearly connect it to the idea of class warfare in the same way that Marx saw religion as an impediment to the revolution. This does not repudiate the logic at all, even if it may be a divergence away from economics only, or Marx's insistence on the primacy of the base over the superstructure, or his insistence that the revolution was historically inevitable. The point is, there is some continuity between these theories, enough for us to classify them all as Marxist in some form. Marxian socialism and its class warfare is possible when the prior identities that bind people to something other than their class, the proletariat, are eliminated. This is why Marx and the Communist Manifesto called for abolishing the family, and why Marxist socialists were up against the concept of race. The family is, according to Marxists, a bourgeois institution which is bound up with class and with religion. The cultural Marxists did not so much diverge from Marx as expand upon him here. Gramsci believed that the capitalists prevented the revolution by substituting the bourgeois interest for the common good through ideology, which sets the status quo for society. Bourgeois ideology promotes the nuclear patriarchal family. What underlies the patriarchal family? Sex. Sexual norms are a bourgeois institution related to religion. How do we deconstruct sexual norms? By turning biology into a social construct, which is gender. How do we destroy the bourgeois family? Deconstruct gender and turn it into an arbitrary identity not tied to sex, reproduction, or blood ties. Patriarchy goes out the window and the family collapses. Now that the bourgeois institution of the family is destroyed, people have one less rung on the metaphorical ladder to cling onto their superstructural identity with. All that's left is the base, economics, and class. Through this process, eliminating every prior identity to the proletariat, the cultural Marxists aim to create class consciousness among the proletariat in a negative manner while establishing its own cultural hegemony. All that will remain after the deconstruction of everything into power relationships is the oppressed proletariat and the other classes that oppress them. It should be obvious to Joel how this works, but for some reason he glosses over the social aspect of Marxian thought, which is evident not only in the Communist Manifesto, but also in post-Marxist thought. As I said, it's not a theory of class warfare. Many cultural Marxists also have socialist views, but as I said in the video, it's very clear that the primary focus of the people in the Frankfurt School is preventing anything approximating fascism or social nationalism from rising again. This is why I think cultural Marxism is fundamentally about preemptively defeating social nationalism, not overthrowing capitalism. First of all, it fits into the theory of class warfare. Which is it, Joel? Is it just a strategic disagreement with orthodox Marxism, or is it not at all a theory of class warfare? Obviously, though, it is a theory of class warfare. The theory of cultural hegemony is fundamentally based on the idea of a single class, the bourgeoisie, utilizing cultural power in order to maintain its existence by preventing class consciousness. I've already explained this, so I'll address the other point. It's true that most of the capitalist-communist alliance is driven by its fight against fascism, as I covered in one of my blog posts. This is probably, aside from the ethnic component, the primary cause of the alliance. It might be more interesting than that, though, since, as Thuletide has pointed out, capitalist bankers bankrolled the USSR for some ungodly reason. But in any case, it would be a mistake to forget how, as I described earlier, cultural Marxism fits into the revolutionary paradigm. The goal is to abolish everything that impedes class consciousness in order to kickstart the revolution from the top down, Marxist-Leninist style. Just because the idea has been appropriated by the capitalists as a power strategy does not mean that the cultural Marxists are any less dedicated to the revolution. There is a real and somewhat effective Marxist current in academia that wants worldwide communism, or at least a form of proletarian state socialism. If the world capitalist system collapses or suffers from a serious crisis, these people will come out of the woodwork to agitate the proletariat. This is a serious danger that should not be downplayed. Now, what Joel is basically disagreeing with here is which power will win, and he thinks it's the global capitalist one, using the theory of cultural Marxism to sweep out any resistance to dependence on the financial elite. I, to some extent, agree with him. I don't think the New World Order is necessarily communist, but rather it's a kind of neo-capitalism with tactical socialist elements. But anyway, to call this strategy cultural Marxism is actually just accurate. It has nothing to do with whatever the powers that be are doing with the ideology. Cultural Marxism came out of the Frankfurt School. It started as Western Marxism, then it underwent development. Gramsci came up with the idea of cultural hegemony, and then cultural Marxism was developed thereafter. The basis of all this thought is Marxist. The end of this thought was Marxist. Why can't we just call a spade a spade? On the subject of the adaptation of cultural Marxism by the capitalist elite, Davis contends that this is proof of the inefficacy of cultural Marxism as a revolutionary strategy. It hasn't caused class warfare, he says, and according to orthodox Marxist theory, it quote-unquote cannot, based on Marx's hyper-focusing on the base over the superstructure, so it is therefore safe and non-Marxian. This is bogus because if we were to take the same logic and apply it to Marxism, mutatis mutandis, we would conclude that Marxism is not Marxist since historical materialism is an ineffective revolutionary strategy. The only thing that could cause class warfare turned out to not cause class warfare. Leninism would be the only real Marxism since it had real results and caused real class warfare, such as dekulakization. But whether something is Marxist or not has nothing to do with its efficacy, and as I've stated, there's enough continuity in thought between Marx and the post-Marxists to establish a common philosophical link. Again, this no true Scotsman argumentation is kind of bogus. Considering the issue of cultural Marxism as a revolutionary strategy, we haven't yet seen its total effects yet. It's too early to declare it ineffective. We've seen it spark real interracial violence. Blacks have attacked white people in revenge based on the cultural Marxist idea of systemic racism. What happens if this is carried out en masse? The result might look like Zimbabwe, which was revolutionary, and the revolution there was based on racial emancipation. Was it real communism? No, nothing is real communism, but it was still a socialist revolution spearheaded by anti-white ideology. Now, it doesn't matter if it was or was not connected to the principle of class or to an economic category. We can see that socialism is very capable of carrying out a revolution on a racial basis. It has no need of orthodox Marxist theory. Now, I won't deny that deconstructionism is useful to capitalists since it wipes out the master class, white people who oppose the statocracy. It's a perfect pretext for the replacement migration to avert the demographic crisis that could crush capitalist power if we're ever allowed to break through. But if you try to imagine what cultural Marxism carried out to its logical extent is, you would immediately see class warfare. The oppressed would become conscious that they are oppressed. Every capitalist, quote-unquote, idol will be cast down, such as the police, racial theory, religion, and so on. And all that will be left is class, and then there will be class consciousness. In fact, one advantage of cultural Marxism is that it gives the capitalist system a face, white people. Maybe they haven't yet identified the real face of capitalism, so to speak, but it's probably coming. Black people are woke on this question to some extent. I think cultural Marxism will get out of control eventually, and the elite will have to shut it down, especially if critical race theory starts to hurt the bottom line as they exclude competent white people from their corporations. When Sarah T. reaches the board of directors, there will be hell to pay for cultural Marxism, so I wouldn't be so skeptical about its revolutionary potential. Often, the people pushing this stuff in academia are real Marxists, or post-Marxists if you prefer, who want the revolution to take place in some form. Maybe it won't be the Marxian end of stateless communism, but that was never possible anyway. As Thuletide pointed out in his response, and which Joel did not respond to, there is continuity between these different forms of Marxism and socialism. Communism is not possible, so it always just ends up as state socialism. Some of Marx's theories were wrong, particularly his historical materialism, so there are always modifications to them to better suit the pragmatic reality of history. You can know true Scotsman all you want about Marxism, but it doesn't change the fact that these theories are fundamentally still class abolitionist, still an enemy to private property, still an enemy to race and religion. We can't forget that because we are a vanguard fighting against another vanguard. We have to point this out since you can't oppose something that is invisible to people. Calling this cultural Marxism and connecting it to internationalist ideology is effective and accurate. We can say otherwise and try to delineate orthodox Marxism from its variations, but what rhetorical purpose does this serve? Are we trying to rescue orthodox Marxism? It couldn't even save itself. If so, then Thuletide is perhaps somewhat correct in assuming Davis has some Marxist sympathies. Also, I want to point out contra Thuletide that Marx does not get to own socialism. There are forms of non-Marxian socialism that should not be under the umbrella of Marxist socialism. For some reason, Davis is pretty silent about what kind of socialism he wants. Is it a national kind of a certain historical character? I assume so. That kind of socialism was deliberately differentiated by its founders from Marxian socialism, and it diverges in such a way that they are not the same at all. It was class integrationist, it respected private property, it held race as a high value, it respected the individual personality, and it valued the nation-state. All of this is a complete repudiation of Marx, so what's the purpose of trying to rehabilitate Marxist thought and to neatly separate it from its dialectical evolutions? Everyone knows the quote from Mustache Man about socialism meaning the common well-being of the people. If that's the case, then there's no problem. This kind of socialism is clearly on the right side of the political spectrum, and it's sufficiently reactionary to satisfy the current historical needs of the right. But on the other hand, if Davis means another kind of socialism, National Bolshevism or Eurasianism, there might be a greater issue since that form is more closely Marxist and left-wing. This is something that Davis needs to clarify if the discussion is to at all be productive. Also, Thuletide spent half of this post screeching about how Karl Marx, Mao, and the USSR weren't gigabased hour guys, like, wow, I did not know that, you're telling me for the first time, laughing emoji. This criticism is fair enough. Thuletide missed the context of your statement, which is that, from the perspective of the cultural Marxists, actual social regimes were pretty problematic, as was Marx himself. I don't think Davis was trying to make the USSR out to be based or something, so we can say that Thuletide was wrong to make assumptions here. Clearly, this is dishonest framing designed to make me out to be some kind of Marxist sympathizer. Sad. Thuletide loses a lot of respect in the scene due to this common inability to argue in good faith. Thuletide sometimes does good work, but this constant crying about how everyone on her side who isn't a libertarian on economics is a commie is so tiresome. So what is it, Davis? What kind of socialism do you prefer? Just say it. You wouldn't have to try to guess or infer what you are if you would just say it in simple terms or explain what you believe. Do you want a proletarian dictatorship, or do you want to integrate the classes? I scrolled through his Telegram and I couldn't find a post that clarifies this. Maybe he talks about it in a video I haven't watched, or maybe it's deliberate, maybe he just hasn't gotten around to it yet, I don't know. Thuletide, on the other hand, has no problem at all explaining what he believes. Davis calls him a libertarian on economics, and yet he has clearly posted what his economic views are, distributism, which is not really free market libertarianism since it would require intervention by the state to implement and maintain. My idealized economic views are closest to distributism, even though I know it's totally unimplementable under this current technological system. Why is Davis so dishonest on this point? He claims that Thuletide is coming to these debates and conducting himself in a dishonest manner, but Davis here is being quite dishonest as well. This seems to be a running theme with these new right figures who try to respond to him. They have no idea what he actually believes and make no effort to figure it out. First, it was Keith Woods trying to claim that Thuletide wouldn't point out the ethnic element of world power, which is false. You can watch my videos on global power where I quoted Thuletide, and you'll find that he made a genealogy of world power mentioning ethnicity often. Now it's Joel Davis trying to smear him as a laissez-faire libertarian. His interlocutors are strawmanning him at every opportunity for no good reason, and it's really poisonous to the debate. Thuletide is not even in complete disagreement with fascism or social nationalism. Finally, I should point out that I would not personally identify with the labels fascist or social nationalist, not because I particularly disagree with these ideologies.